Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today at Sustainable Conservation's fourth and final webinar in our spring series, Climate Resilient in Action. And this one is called Shared Waters, Shared Solutions. We are thrilled to have three great panelists here today with us to discuss how collaborative partnerships and on-the-ground action can advance drought resilience across the state. Before we get started, I would love to give many thanks to our webinar sponsors, Spotswood Estate Vineyards, Wilson Sonsini Foundation, and Jennifer Hernandez of Holland and Knight for supporting our spring webinar series and sharing Sustainable Conservation's vision of stewarding our state's most precious natural resources for all Californians. My name is Ryan Flaherty, and I'm Senior Director of Circular Economies at Sustainable Conservation. For those of you that don't know us, Sustainable Conservation advances the collaborative stewardship of California's land, air, and water for the benefit of nature and people. So every day we bring together business, landowners, scientists, government agencies, nonprofits, and others to advance collaborative solutions to steward the natural resources that we all depend on in ways that are just and make economic sense. So in our climate resilience action series this spring, we and our partners have been exploring how increasing weather extremes like wildfire, flood, and drought are reshaping California, and how we can work together to build resilience for a safer, healthier future. The previous webinars featured leading climate scientists and representatives from NGOs, tribes, and government, all highlighting the impacts of climate change and opportunities to improve forest health, wildfire resistance, and flood risk reduction. If you weren't able to join us, we encourage you to watch the first two recordings on Sustainable Conservation's YouTube channel. In this webinar, we're going to turn our focus from fires and floods to drought. But before we do so, we'd love to get to know you, our audience, a little better. So we're going to throw up a poll that will have three questions on it. The first question is, where are you joining us from today? And if you keep scrolling down, you'll see the other ones. What best describes your affiliation? And how would you rate your level of knowledge on drought resilience strategies in California? So we'll pause for about 30 seconds to let you all fill that out. And this poll is a great way to give the panelists a little sense of who's in the room. We'll give it about 10 more seconds. If you haven't filled it in yet, go for it. Okay. So it looks like we've got a good mix of folks joining us from the Bay Area, from the Sacramento Valley, and the San Joaquin Valley, and out of state. And then the rest of you are scattered around California. And it looks like the bulk of participants are from government agencies, nonprofits, and a few of you from academia, agriculture, and business. And other, if you would like to share in the other where you're coming from, let us know in the chat. And then how would you rate your level of knowledge? Looks like we've got a good bell curve here with most of you saying about average and a few beginners and experts on either end. Thank you for that. And before I move into our panel discussion, did want to let you know that we will have some time at the end for audience questions, but you do not need to wait until that time to ask the question. So find that Q&A box down below and throw your questions in there as you think of them, and we'll do our best to address all of those at the end of the discussion. So now, without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Reggie Collins. He's the Legal and Policy Director at CalTrout. Reggie is CalTrout's Legal and Policy Director, joined the organization in 2016. His expertise lies in California water law and is the lead for CalTrout for the Potter Valley Project. And he also oversees CalTrout's legal and policy departments. He also serves as a member of California's Department of Water Resources Drought Resilience and Interagency Partners Collaborative, or DRIP Collaborative, representing CalTrout and conservation interests. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that DRIP Collaborative in a little bit. So welcome, Reggie. Secondly, we have Rebecca Kaiser, owner and farmer at Avalar Moore Farms. She is a fourth generation farmer from California's Central Valley and the owner of Avalar Moore Farms, where she grows pistachios and almonds. Rebecca is a leader and an innovator blending precision agriculture with environmental stewardship, doing practices like groundwater recharge, data analytics, and cover cropping. She also serves as a board member of the American Pistachio Growers Association. She's a current participant in the Water Education Foundation's Water Leaders class of 2025 and a graduate of the American Pistachio Growers Lead On program. So welcome, Rebecca. And last, but certainly not least, Eddie Ocampo from Self Help Enterprises. Eddie is Director of Public Affairs at Self Help, which is a multifaceted housing and community development nonprofit serving the San Joaquin Valley here in California since 1965. Eddie is routinely sought out for input on legislative matters related to water, community development, and housing at both the state and national levels. And I can personally attest to that, as Eddie's a member of Sustainable Conservation's San Joaquin Valley Regional Advisory Committee, and he always provides thoughtful and insightful input in discussions on the committee. So welcome, Eddie. So to kick us off, I'll just, reflecting back, we started this webinar series with Ashley, our CEO, talking with Dr. Daniel Swain, and they were talking about one of the main topics was this, what they call weather whiplash. So these very extreme fluctuations between extreme drought and then punctuated by these really intense floods. And we're, as I mentioned before, going to focus on droughts. And those droughts can have really devastating impacts on our environment, on our communities, and on our farmers. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to build resiliency in the face of these extreme droughts, but there is progress being made. People are getting their hands dirty. There's innovative work being done, and people are coming together in ways that might surprise you. So we'll talk about all of that today over the next 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A with you, the audience. So with that, I'll start with Eddie. Would just love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've seen drought impacting your work with communities.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm happy to be here. I work for, as mentioned earlier, a San Joaquin Valley-based affordable housing developer who's been around for over 60 years, Self Help Enterprises. I suspect that folks on occasion may ask, why is an affordable housing developer engaged in water, wastewater treatment, and the drought space? Well, since being founded by Quakers, Self Help Enterprises has worked alongside communities to facilitate and build affordable housing development, provide technical assistance, and help build community capacity in our valley communities. Our communities and our organization have benefited tremendously from this collaborative, inclusive partnership. As an organization, we pride ourselves in genuinely working alongside our communities and partners, identified service gaps, and in a collaborative fashion, finding and implementing appropriate solutions for these gaps. Access to safe and affordable water for communities and families is one of the gaps that we feel urgently needs to be addressed in our valley and in our state. Drought conditions drier conditions, climate change, not prioritizing resilience planning and preparedness for communities, local government, alongside with limited drought response resources, significantly impact access to water for everyone. Communities in underserved areas are most vulnerable. We partner with our communities, and it is within these communities and through these important partnerships that we serve that we have worked with over 150 communities throughout our valley and our foothills. And our service area covers from the counties of Kern, Tulare, Kings, Madera, Mariposa, Merced, Stanislaus, and San Joaquin. And uh, saying that, I was in Planala earlier today, which is one of those communities that's been hit by whiplash, as you mentioned earlier, when folks get hit on the drought side and they during the summer, and they also get hit with floods in the winter and during the wet seasons. Um, which stresses the importance of resilience planning with a lot of communities that we're working with. Drought has impacted a lot of folks in our areas, and I think many of our valley communities have contributed to humanizing drought and highlighting the human, giving it a human face, and I'll touch more on that as we discuss it further.
Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate it. Looking forward to digging into that a little bit more. Rebecca wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about yourself and your farm and how you see drought impacting your livelihood.
Thank you, Ryan. Like you said, I'm a fourth generation grower, a small family farmer, just growing outside of the south of Huron. We've seen drought impacting us specifically in the cost of inputs in water. And you see this through land fouling. I farm in a junior water rights district, and especially after the Central Valley Improvement Act, we saw reductions in our water allocations that we needed to react to. And you saw some land fouling going on there. So it's always kind of been in our approach, but specifically with the onset of SGMA and the untimely and later water allocations, we've seen more and more land fouling going on. And that's had a direct impact on our communities because, especially the town of Huron, Kalinga, which is nearby as well, less farming activities means less jobs. And so you kind of see this full circle effect, like Eddie was talking about, and the human impact of drought.
And just a quick follow-up. So the sustainable SGMA is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which is a groundwater legislation that was passed in 2014. And I'm sure that will come back up again. So remember SGMA, the audience. But I was wondering if you could just talk very briefly about what is a junior water rights holder and what does that mean?
We have several classes of water rights, which this might be better suited for Reggie, but you have everywhere from pre-1914, post-1914, riparian, which means you're closer to a watershed, and it's more of a senior water rights status. So then you have appropriative, which is your first in time, first in right, I believe. And junior water rights is basically you're the last one down the line, and whatever is allocated after everyone else's needs are met, you get your allocation.
Thank you. Sorry to throw a little water rights at you, but I think it's helpful for people to understand that, that is that order and we're kind of last once all the others have been appropriated. Reggie, how about you? Did you talk a little bit about your work and how drought impacts your constituents?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rebecca, I will never tell a water rights holder that I will know more about water rights than they do. So perfect answer and not surprisingly, of course. Yeah, absolutely. I started, as you said, Caltrab about 2016. Before that, I spent some time with the Nature Conservancy and Next Gen Climate. Knew I wanted to get into the water arena. And, as I've been in this conservation space, and seeing, the cyclical droughts that move through California, I think the biggest impact in, when I think about our constituency, I think about our tagline there, which is fish, water, and people. And those elements really need to come together and work well together in times of drought. And so on the positive end, you see collaborations like we've seen under drought emergency funding on the Scott River, which is a small tributary to the Klamath up in the Scott Valley, way up in Siskiyou County near the Oregon border. And, the Yurok tribe was able to get a drought emergency grant, and they brought in 10 landowners and partnered with CalTrout to implement, a project that will help with drought resiliency. So you see really positive community interactions where you see those communities that haven't always gotten super well or along well together in the past. And so there's that crunch that kind of can bring people together. And then you see, the opposite. You see folks that, are hit by water curtailments that, intentionally violate existing curtailment laws just so they can fill up their stock water ponds and keep their, business operations, alive during, those critical times. And so I think you see a compression of these diverse, interests that really come together during drought. And I think our goal, and really my goal in those interactions, is how to make that kind of a friendly team building exercise rather than, pushing folks closer to conflict. And so you obviously get the individual impacts, less water in streams, especially in these critical tributaries. You see temperature increases for fish species. You see, a lot of those immediate reactions, but big picture, you have the opportunity for a lot more collaboration, and you see some conflict arising because of it.
Appreciate you all, and I'm already seeing a thread here. I tried to force you into focusing specifically on you and your constituencies, and all of you talked about connectivity to others and the kind of impact beyond you and your constituencies. So I'm sure we'll keep pulling on that thread. But I want to move on, and maybe Rebecca, starting with you, if you could talk about, we kind of talked about some of the impacts of drought. So if we flip that, what does drought resiliency look like on your farm and for your agricultural industry partners?
You've embodied the life of a farmer, is just resiliency, and the farming communities attached. So what we've done on my farm specifically is we've embraced precision ag, which is the cool new term for just using technology and telemetry to make data-driven decisions and to basically utilize our resources efficiency. Well, what does that look like? We're using GPS-guided tractors, soil moisture sensors, aerial imagery to test plant stress. We have the on-farm telemetry to gauge photosynthesis and weather, all to make these decisions on when and how much to irrigate, when and how much to apply. So it's really kind of targeting and making our growing more efficient. We also use some old school stuff, which is stuff from my grandparents' generation, where we are cover cropping. And we're utilizing the native grasses to help with evapotranspiration loss, so it helps us manage our water better. It also provides a beneficial habitat to beneficial pests so that we don't have to spray as much. And then we come in and we use grazing so to help with manage those cover crops when they get a little out of hand. So we bring in sheep, and they're so cute, and they help us manage some of those farming practices. So it's kind of neat to have embrace the technology and some of our old school style of farming and merge them into this new style. I think most notably for this conversation is we utilize groundwater recharge. And back in 2003 on my farm specifically, we were able to set up a flood mar, which is a managed aquifer recharge. And we also used over irrigation to help spread out some of those waters from that all of the rain that we received in 2023. And that was due to, in part, the executive order, because we were able to fast track all that go through all the red tape and all the permitting just to be able to take on these floodwaters and do our part. With that one growing season, I specifically was able to recharge 2,000 acre feet on my 240 acres of fallow land and my almost 300 acres of planted. And that gave me a little over 2 years of my crop requirement that I was able to do in 1 year. We've also done recharge scents with whatever excess water I have and just sinking into the ground. So every chance we get, we're trying to do that on my farm. Off my farm, we've been able to collaborate with the city of Huron, a group of landowners and like myself, got together with the city of Huron to help provide water security and flood protection through another recharge project called the Arroyo Pasajero Recharge Project. City of Huron is known for severe flooding that affects the town. Like the entire town is inundated with water that comes off of the Arroyo Pasajero Creek. 1995, it was fatal for some people and just it was a bad thing. So in 2014, 2015, there's a big drought. A lot of people were affected by it. City of Huron ran out of water. CVP provides, Central Valley Project provides municipal water, ran out of water. So they were able to hook up to neighboring properties, neighboring well, and the neighbors ourselves were able to go out on the open market, find some water for them so that the community wouldn't go dry. These are some of the impacts of drought. Fast forward to 2018, we get together with neighboring properties, a collective of us, and we started to develop this recharge project, which the city of Huron could tap into and divert some of those floodwaters into this recharge project. 2020, we were able to get it up and running, and now they have about 500 acre feet of groundwater credits are reserved through an appropriate water right for the city's use. The farmers also have fully permitted recharge facility to utilize, and it also provides floodwater protection for the city. So it's a win-win for both ag and for the small farming community of Huron.
Wow, that's great. And we'll probably come back to that example maybe in a little bit later. I just to put in the context for the audience, if I did my math correctly, you said 2,000 acre feet.
Yep.
So that's about 650 million gallons of water, which is equivalent to about 1,000 Olympic swimming pools. So an extraordinary amount of water. Reggie, how about same question to you? If you could talk a little bit about what drought resiliency looks like and some of the examples you've seen.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And then, too often it's a buzzword in California, and I think those direct actions are really important. So thank you for sharing, Rebecca. Yeah, when I think of drought resiliency, I think of preparing our watersheds to recover in times of those critical points of drought. I'm sure as most of the participants here will agree with, California has a climate that is pretty prone to droughts. In fact, it's every summer. We have our precipitation patterns that come in the winter, fall, and the ending in the spring, creating that snowpack in California. And then we have these prolonged drought or dry periods. And so a lot of our, in the case of cow trout and kind of the issues I look at, native species are somewhat resilient in terms of facing, short-term drought periods. And so you see these in the example of, salmon in California. They can swim hundreds of miles upstream, end up in these little tributaries that actually eventually might run dry during the summer under normal conditions. And they live in these cool water pools, in these high elevation areas where there's springs, they've accessed that cold water, and then they over summer, waiting for that next fall spring to move forward. And so the fish species in California, especially trout and salmon that we're looking at, are pretty resilient in the face of these, individual episodic droughts that are called summers here. And so in that event, a lot of our species are prone to being resilient. And the question is, how do we foster that in the time when climate change and the climate crisis is deepening, worsening? We'll have larger periods of prolonged drought. We'll have years that go by where you have below average precipitation, where those snow melt won't meet the needs of the fish species that exist there. And we'll stress them, even if we didn't add to the equation the abundant, important water uses we have in California, for the growing population, for agricultural, for municipalities, for business sectors. When you add that equation, it's imperative that we think of ways in which we can help these species along, right? So when I think of resiliency in our project works, I think of a couple, obvious examples and maybe some more non-traditional ones. The first is, how do we get more water in the stream in these critical times with having as little impact as possible on the importance of human health and consumption drinking water, with agricultural entities that have been here for a long time, and that we want to foster that economic security and cultural heritage that brings as well. And how do we work in the important advice and long-standing traditions of our tribal nations, right? Simple equation, I guess. But when you actually look at the individual projects you can put forward, you can do things like working with farmers and ranchers to create incentives to use more water efficient delivery systems, using less water, but delivering enough and the same amount of water at critical times, either below the surface or during different irrigation practices. Sometimes even flood irrigation is really beneficial because it moves back into the system. And CalTrout has done a ton of work working with our state funding agencies. Wildlife Conservation Board does an amazing job. A lot of the entities under CNRA, just so I leave that umbrella open, which is the California Natural Resources Agency. And there are various agencies like WCB, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Coastal Conservancy. We apply for grants, then bring them to these farmers and say, hey, if we implement, I'm just going to do this very simply, and I don't want to offend any farmers that are on here, a pivot system that is more efficient of water use. And then we ask them to dedicate the water savings in stream, either permanently or permissively, so that they can leave that water in the system during critical times of year. That allows for a collaborative solution, which, paying for that farm equipment, which can be really costly, and allows us to, implement potential habitat changes, more riparian zones, and then offer more water in stream. It's a really obvious example of how you can create that drought resiliency. And we do a lot of those projects in collaboration with tribal nations and water users. And we think that's a pretty effective individual action, you can take. There's other larger, overarching ways in which you can incentivize water resiliency, in these areas. It's making sure that we have ways in which the State Water Board can notify farmers ahead of time that there will be curtailment moving forward, and incentivizing landowners to, enter into the type of programs that I just, explained, like, hey, go work with CalTrout or the Nature Conservancy or the, any variety, river partners. There's a million people I'm leaving out on this, so I shouldn't even started listing. A lot of entities that have the ability to help, push for those solutions. And so I think those kind of incentive type regulatory changes can be really helpful. Regulation changes are not going to solve everything, just like restoration won't solve everything. And so those are a couple of concrete examples. Another non-traditional example, just really quickly, that I always like to bring up is the Potter Valley Project, which is removing 2 dams on the Eel River, which sounds counterintuitive because you're removing water supply, but we're actually creating a diversion in partnership with Sonoma Water Agency, with the Round Valley Indian tribes, with Humboldt County, with Mendocino County Inland Water Power Commission, to actually put a new diversion in that old facility where those dams are currently on the upper habitat of the Potter Valley Project, and actually creating a diversion flow regime that mimics the natural hydrograph, that removes the same amount of water that it normally would under the current conditions, and move it to the Russian River in order to create that water supply storage down in Lake Mendocino. It's a complicated project, so happy to answer any follow-up questions that we have from many panels at a later time. But you can even remove facilities that offer anadromous habitat passage, which is, the removal of those two dams will create almost 288 linear river miles of habitat. It actually increases the spawning habitat on the Eel River for recovery of those species, salmon and steelhead. Offers, I think, a 75% increase in spawning habitat. So it allows for their recovery and a partnership with water users to deliver the same amount of water, actually more water than they currently receive during the variance through our removal project. And so you can get really creative and find solutions throughout California if you move past the narratives that removing water supply per se or changing water supply per se, results in less productive agricultural or, less water available for human consumption. So just a couple of examples, and sorry for dragging on there, Ryan.
No worries. And we'll probably come back if we have time to talk about the DRIP collaborative. But moving over to you, Eddie, would love to hear your response on, what does drought resilience look like for communities and a couple of examples.
Oh, great. Resilience for me, it's about people. It's about communication. It's about dialogue. Fairmead is a community that we've been working with for a long time. It's a community that's near and dear to me, and it's small, over 100 years old. A lot of culture, a lot of history. He used to have his own hotel, post office, giant orange hamburger juice stand, and it was a stop for Wells Fargo stagecoach at one point. Residents are very proud of their history and of their community, rightfully so. There's also, like a number of other communities in our state, the fifth or fourth largest economy in the world, a sundown community. That is a community that was established for people of color, mostly African Americans, who not long ago were expected to not be in other neighboring communities after sundown. It's the name of these communities like Fairmead. When I first started with self-help enterprises, out of necessity due to lack of childcare, I would take my young children with me to the monthly evening meetings at the Fairmead Community and Friends meetings that were held at Galilee Missionary Baptist Church, and right smack in the middle of Fairmead. At the time, all my kids were 10 years old, three boys and three girls, one boy, and they would sit back in the last row, and for the most part, they would behave. Didn't take long for the lovely people to start engaging my kids and feeding them. So they liked going to these meetings, and my kid grew up, and I had the privilege of meeting many of the members of the Fairmead Community and Friends. They, for me, represent resilience. Community members like Lawyer and Annie Cooper, who were a beautiful couple and have since passed away in their early 80s when I first met them. In 2014, like many of our Valley residents impacted by drought, Lawyer and Annie's domestic well went dry. By this point in their mid 80s, Lawyer, a Korean War veteran and with limited resources, would haul water in the back of his small pickup truck, and along with the 250-gallon tank that he put in the back, and he'd fill it up at his neighbors, and he would haul water every day. This was definitely not sustainable, particularly for a person in his mid 80s. Lawyer reached out for the county for assistance. He reached out for self-help for assistance, and neither county nor self-help at that time could provide him with any assistance, which was really frustrating for Lawyer, also frustrating for us to a lesser extent, but fairly frustrating for Lawyer and a lot of people that were in his situation at that time. Recognizing the need for this area of service, Paul Boyer, then my boss in direct community services for self-help enterprises prior to his retirement, out of necessity, he came up with this wild idea of installing this 1,500-gallon tank and plumbing it to the water supply. The idea carried some promise, but who was going to pay for it? And especially at the scale that was anticipated here with the drought hitting the valley and many other communities that we serve. We told Lawyer about this possibility of maybe doing this. He thought it was a great idea. He went back to the Board of Supervisors, started providing testimony. At this point, it had been months that he'd been delivering water to his house. This man in his mid-80s. He was always happy. He was always, had a ready smile for you. Started providing testimony, and he broke down in the middle of it. He was frustrated. He was exhausted. He was defeated at that point, and he cried during his testimony. This is powerful. This is powerful not just for the folks who were listening at the local level and in the county, but also for folks who later saw this video at the state. And I really genuinely believe that it was that testimony that led to the establishment of the drought response, the tank systems that we now see installed throughout the state. So for me, resilience equals people, equals testimony, equals educating through experience. And it's about humanizing what's impacting the people in our communities and in our state. So that's what resilience is for me.
It's such a powerful story, and just thinking about all these examples that each of you have given about these kind of unlikely folks coming together to figure out solutions and help each other out, whether it's that story or Rebecca and Huron, or talking about the projects that you're working on, Reggie. So might come back to that in a little bit. I do want to start wrapping up so we can get to Q&A. I wonder if you could do very quick, maybe a minute or two each. It's popped up to date, but we can't talk about drought in California without talking about other things, right? Without talking about flood, which seems kind of crazy, the polar opposite, and yet it's so inextricably linked here in California, floods and droughts. Or whether you're talking about fires or access to water, water quality, air quality, availability of food and food production. So I was wondering if you could just pick one of those, connecting issues related to water availability and drought, and maybe share a thought or two on them. And I'll let you kind of popcorn in, whoever wants to go first on that one.
I can speak a little bit about that. With drought, we're going to see a lot more food scarcity. And I just want to stress that eating local is good for the environment, because locally sourced food is grown by conscientious farmers like myself, who abide by the highest standards in conventional and organic practices. We truly are stewards of the land. And if we see more drought, there will be this overarching effect on our communities, due to the less economic activities going on. And so there's more far-reaching impacts with drought that just don't stop in agriculture. It continues on down the line.
And I'll just add, for those that don't know, and I don't have these numbers in front of me, so I hope I get these right, but California grows about 2/3 of the nuts in the world. It grows about 20% it produces about 20% of milk. And think about, is it 2/3 of the fruits and vegetables? I hope I got those right. But I think the underlying point is, we have 400 plus crops in California. So we're growing a lot of different types of crops, specialty crops. A lot of, we're not a corn, soybean, wheat region. Nothing wrong with that, but we do have a huge diversity of a lot of very healthy crops. And we do have a lot of very stringent regulations and farmers that are innovating, as Rebecca mentioned. So those of you that live in California should feel very proud eating California food, as well as those elsewhere. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. I was listening to Rebecca earlier when she was describing her farming practices, and it really sounded. There's a couple team members on listening in as well. Stephanie Moreno and Sonia Sanchez, who are part of our MLRP efforts with Self-Help Enterprises, multi-benefit land repurposing. And your operations there, Rebecca, sounded like a page out of that MLRP book. There was quite a bit of diversity in your operations, and to your earlier highlight of growing diverse crops for local consumption. I really do think that we can do a lot better as a community here in the Valley to further diversify these crop options for more local consumption of to be consumed here by our residents, our communities here in the area. Along with that, I do think that folks are talking not just about access to water, but also about access to employment opportunity. And it would be hypocritical of us not to recognize that, you know, our local industry, our ag, our local culture represents a huge opportunity for a lot of the communities that have been down the valley. I mean, we all wish there was more diversity of economic opportunities for folks to work in, but the reality is that we have a very strong community of ag here in the valley that represents a huge percentage of what those employment opportunities are. That said, folks are concerned what's going to happen as we transition to more efficient and um, uh, ways of operating both on the people side of employment, but also on the water access side, and what that may translate for local economies. And these are conversations that are happening at the community level. And these are conversations that I think should be happening not just at the community level, but with local farming interests, local government, and local environmental interests to collectively address.
Before Reggie chimes in, I'll just let everyone know we're going to switch over to Q&A in a moment. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A box yet. So go ahead and start throwing questions in there. Reggie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, very, I think, accurate answers right there. I think that's spot on about what the potential is here in the future for the drought in California. When we look at the core of Caltrout's mission, we have done a report. We're about to do our third one on just the state of the salmon, we call it, but how all the fish are doing. And, in the last report, it was something like a third of our native, we have 32 species that exist in California historically. At the current rate, are set to either extirpate out of the state or be extinct entirely in the next 30 years. And so this is a real moment in time that we're looking at for our native species and species in California, and that threat exists in different ways in all sectors, right? We currently have 1 million people in California that don't have access to clean drinking water. The UN has stated areas of emergency in California right now for drinking water access. There's a lot here that we see in California that will be drastically impacted by the continued climate crisis, and our current water use is not going to be sustainable for that whole time. Shouldn't be a controversial statement that we are not currently prepared for that. What I will say is that, putting my more hopeful, less dour hat on here, is that, in these times of crisis, if we address them adequately with diverse interests, you have real opportunities here. These times of crisis can lead to innovation. It can lead to these diverse partnerships. If we don't put ourselves in the silos of, fish first farms or other dynamics that we've seen, and kind of blame each other for these issues, and just recognize that the problem exists, we can face it together, or we can argue as much as we want. That's the opportunity for really creative thinking, because otherwise the writing is most certainly on the wall. So it takes all of us to gather as many like-minded folks and those that we traditionally haven't worked with before as possible to think creatively, and not immediately shoot down ideas that seemed wild, in the past and may be necessary in the short term.
Yeah, I think that was very well said. And that conflict of food versus fish and cities versus food and all of that it makes for great headlines, but it doesn't make for actually getting stuff done on the ground and solving the challenges that all of these different sectors face. So I love hearing from each of you, talking from your own perspective, whether it's community, ag, species, environment, talking about the importance of the other pieces of the pie. So with that, we will switch over to Q&A, and I see the first question is, what legislation being moved along are you most concerned about or are on high alert for you?
Um, there's no one piece of legislation for me personally that I'm on high alert for. What I'm mostly concerned with, and at least within our water district, is just having a seat at the table to be able to discuss and collaborate, like Reggie was talking about, so that we can come up with these solutions and that involves all stakeholders at play. So as long as we have a seat at the table to be able to talk and discuss, we can figure out what allocations are appropriate and for each one of us.
Yep. To echo what Rebecca said, there's no one specific legislation that's troubling. I mean, I think that there's a lot of um, a lot less opportunity for folks to discuss these very important issues. You know, folks across stakeholder groups to discuss these very important issues nowadays than there had been in the recent past because there's just less financing available to allow for that discussion to take place. Relationships cost. Building capacity in each one of our stakeholder groups costs money. Getting those stakeholder groups together to discuss these very important issues costs time, which costs money, and funding. That communication is important. I think that it's important to have embassies in different countries and in different stakeholder groups for a reason, so that there could be dialogue. I really do feel that unless we finance that dialogue, we're going to be losing out on an opportunity in the future, in the near future. And being that it keeps getting hotter, it keeps getting drier, and resources becoming more and more scarce by the day, I think that highlighting the importance of that type of discussion to find these collaborative solutions is important.
Yeah, I mean, California has a host of water bills that are moving through the legislature. There's there's a bill that is supposed to basically replace what's in its I think it's SB 601 or AB 601. And it's a bill that's aiming to replace the loss of the definition of nexus waters. To boil that down in kind of like technical Clean Water Act terms, basically the Supreme Court level wetlands aren't called waters anymore. And so in California, there's a push to protect those wetland estuary habitats and areas to make sure that California still keeps those critical interaction areas whole. I'm excited about that. There are also elements that it's a very large bill, so I understand people having a lot of scrutiny on that. And then the one that really concerns me, I think I mentioned it in the funding element, but the loss of our federal partners funding is deeply concerning. When you look at removing NOAA and moving NIMFs, potentially over, zeroing out a lot of these critical agencies' ability to conduct climate science, this is going to set us back decades. And so we're going to have to rely on international partners. And luckily, we live in California where there's a lot of attempt for backfill. But anytime you intentionally disrupt scientific study, some elements that have been looking at soil samples, preparing for climate change in the future, that I can't not call it the big beautiful bill, unfortunately, but that bill is going to severely impact farmers, conservation groups, and folks trying to make sure that people have clean water's ability to do so in the short term. And we just passed the largest infrastructure bill in the history of the United States. Luckily, seeing a lot of that being implemented, but losing those fundings will directly harm California's ability to protect our farmers, our fish, and our communities.
And we will need to wrap up soon, but I did want to, there's one question I think is very interesting, and maybe I'll just ask Rebecca to answer this in the interest of time, and maybe if Eddie or Reggie have anything urgent to chime in, but because you did mention kind of, you were talking about allocations in your last comment. So Ruth has asked what climate information would be the most helpful to understand water availability during future droughts?
All the data. all of it. Just for example, when I was doing my recharge, I incurred severe evapotranspiration losses during the summer months as anticipated. So any sort of data on ET, on temperature, on precipitation, we'll take all of it so that we can be more precise with our growing.
Yeah, accessible data to non-experts, I think, is important. We were just recently at the California Data Water Consortium Collaborative, that big meeting that happened in Sacramento just about last week, I believe. Folks were talking about just standardizing data, making accessible to non-experts, and having this data available, particularly at the local level, so folks could make decisions, whether it be groundwater, water quality, so non-experts could make decisions, or at least contribute to decisions and solutions at the local level would be important. But the standardization is something that we're far behind, and we have not invested in that space as a state, and I think we could do better there as well. There's a question here by Josette Lewis as well. It says, given that some ag land is likely to come out of production, and what do each of you think we need to do to transition the land for the best reconciliation for landowner, local communities, and environment? I really do think that the MLRP provides a wonderful model for that, and I feel that investing in that type of effort, given the size of our state and the size of this problem and issue here in the state, I think investing at a level that makes sense would be. I think the current ask is $50 million, but I think that ask is very modest compared to the importance of this issue.
And I'll just say, for a brief context there, the MLRP is the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, which is a fairly new program that provides funding for growers to do things that reduce their water use, reduce their pumping, while also providing multiple benefits. So it could be habitat, it could be a range of kind of co-benefits. With that, I think the two other questions I see here are require their own webinars, I think. We have one question about water rights, mediating water rights in kind of disadvantaged communities, and then another one about the Delta Conveyance Project. So I think we're going to have to pass on those, because I certainly don't think we have enough time to jump into those. We will appreciate everyone's joining us. I think that I am super interested in some of the threads that I heard, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to say kind of 1 30-second kind of key thing they want to leave the audience with. But before you do that, I just want to share, I mean, it was very interesting for me to hear, all of you talk about in some form or another resilience, as it's linked to be successful with resilience, the need for collaboration and kind of, collaboration with the unusual suspects. I heard that resiliency is about thoughtful innovation. And I also heard that we really are going to need both kind of latest and greatest knowledge and technologies, as well as historic and traditional knowledge and technologies, whether it's traditional ecological knowledge, or whether it's, great-great-grandfathers on the farm and what they used to do. So I think that was a really interesting takeaway for me. But with that, I will start with Eddie, and then Reggie and Rebecca close us out with just a thought or two that you'd like the audience to leave with.
This is such a collaborative group, Reggie, Rebecca, Ryan. I think I'm just going to add to that sentiment. Nothing meaningful ever gets built in the perimeter. People need to come together to build something worthwhile. Let's keep talking to each other. I think that's my message.
Yeah. I would just say, learn as much as you can about this. I think that there's a lot of helpful literature out there. I think that there's interesting. I'll just make one quick plug for the DRIP Collaborative, which is the Drought Resiliency Interagency Partners Collective called DRIP. It brings in kind of the I like to describe it as like the village people, you know, like everything, a farmer and a rancher and a conservation group associated with fish and a conservation group associated with ducks, and basically put them together to think about how we can push our agencies to be more thoughtful in terms of drought. And so plugging into that element, you know, it's interesting. It's a public forum, so you all can listen in. There's an amazing drought kind of review and monitor by a couple of folks at DWR to start every one of those meetings. They're quarterly, and so it's a good way to check in and see some of the folks that are actively trying to prepare our state for more collaborative approaches on drought issues. So I'll leave it with that plug.
Follow up with just be open to communication. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but sustainable conservation has been a good resource, not only to myself, but also to all of ag, helping lead discussions and inform all of us on various types of recharge projects, whether it's above ground or underground through like a reverse tile system. Super cool stuff's happening, and to just speak with others and get to know your water district. They're there to help. They have resources and they can point you in the right direction.
All right. With that, we're gonna wrap up, and I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Eddie and Rebecca and Reggie for sharing your expertise, for being with us. Really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you to those in the audience for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. We will be sending out the recording soon. In case you missed anything, in case you had to join late or hop off early, or would like to, listen to the conversation again or share it with others. We will be taking the summer off from our webinar series, but we look forward to seeing you all in the fall. In the meantime, if you would like to follow or support Sustainable Conservation's work, you'll see here a QR code and other ways to get in touch on the screen here. And thank you very, very much for tuning in. And thanks to the panelists. Hope everyone has a great day.